In the United States, North America, and certainly Western Europe, in order to bring drugs to market, they have to be studied in patients who actually live in those areas. Some of the other countries in the world also require that. For instance, in Japan, you can't have a new drug in Japan unless you've actually done the clinical trials in Japanese patients. Now, it's not just a national pride situation. The reality is that certain patients from different races react differently to different drugs, as you would imagine. So to give you an idea of how much time goes by, Susan just remarked about a product called bexarotene or targretin. That drug has been available in the United States since 1999. It is not yet available in Japan. So they're still working on the clinical trials to actually get that done. Part of the issue is related to the fact that in some of these larger cancers, like breast cancer and lung cancer, there are literally millions of patients available. And in the case of CTCL, there are only a few patients. What adds complication to this is the fact that not everybody wants to get into a clinical trial. It's a very personal decision, and you can see here that only about 4% of the actual eligible patients who could get into a clinical trial actually ever participate in one. And in cancer trials, because of the nature of most cancers, which are short-lived scenarios, it's only about 1% of the eligible patients who actually get in there. So what does that actually mean? What that means is that, unfortunately, the number of patients who can be studied to get new drugs to market is so tiny that it takes a long time. So while a lot of the drug industry money is spent on new drug research, about $85 billion in development this last year, there are very few patients who can ultimately be counted on to get into clinical trials. So this slows things up in terms of the advance of new medications. To give you an idea here, there are about 30,000 patients in the United States who actually have been accurately diagnosed with CTCL of one form or another. There are 2,600,000 breast cancer patients, and there are probably close to 7 million lung cancer patients now. So the difference in accessible patient population makes a huge difference in what can happen. One of the largest clinical trials done in cutaneous T-cell lymphoma had fewer than 150 patients enrolled in it, and it took almost 7 years to complete. So what I'm trying to share with you is just it's kind of the hurdle rate, how hard it is to actually get new medications out to you. But on the very positive side, and before we flip to the next slide, I'll say that in the last 15 years, there's actually been much more work in the area of CTCL than there ever has in literally the 50 years that went before that. So one of the drugs that was mentioned this morning was nitrogen mustard. That drug existed really as one form, hadn't been studied accurately in this disease for a long, long time, and just recently, one of our partners here, their company, has done research to make this into a safer and more convenient way to be delivered for patients who specifically have CTCL. So now there is a product directly available for that, but the research literally was known about this for many, many years, but wasn't able to be acted on until recently. So some of those kinds of things play into how it is that drugs actually come to you. But again, the positive news is many of the companies that have been doing research in the lymphoma field have found out that studying CTCL is, if you will, kind of a Rosetta Stone for this disease. They can learn a lot more about lymphomas overall if they'll do some work in CTCL, and that benefits all of us. Okay, you want to have at it?
Absolutely. So certainly it's important to underscore the fact that patients do not get treated like guinea pigs. 97% of people said that they were treated with dignity and respect, reported that the care was very good. I mean, this is something that I think people are concerned about, certainly from a high level, but really when they get involved in clinical trials, there's a great passion for being involved and knowing that they're making a difference. So the placebo effect also, or the placebo component of clinical trials is not something that patients experience, certainly in the disease state of cancer. When patients get on clinical trials, they're given the best agents that are out there. It's an avenue for patients to get new agents that ordinarily they wouldn't have access to. And health insurance, in fact, does cover many aspects of clinical trials. So that's something that I think many people feel, is a negative effect or a negative aspect of being involved in a clinical trial. Yeah, Medicare has been covering clinical trials since 2000. So diagnostics are also covered, and the NCI funds many clinical trials. And not being near a big hospital certainly is not a requirement for participating in a clinical trial.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I make a note below here that participating in a clinical trial is a very personal decision. So especially for those patients with few remaining options for care, if they have very advanced disease, et cetera, getting into a clinical trial may result in getting access to the most advanced treatments. And certainly for those centers that are very involved in the treatment of cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, it's an opportunity for those patients to get some of the most advanced care that's available in that. But you should always talk to your doctor about those choices. And I think anything that you hear from the foundation and from any of us that are involved with the foundation, really needs to be mediated by what your direct physician actually believes about your personal situation. There was earlier a question from one of the gentlemen in the audience here that, if there was a bit more of a formulaic approach where you could look at which drugs would actually produce the best results, you can look at that information in aggregate, but I think as each of you know, you each have a unique personality, while you actually have a unique way of reacting to treatment and reacting to the kind of care. So I think that's where your physician and your caregivers and nursing staff such as Marianne really make a huge difference in understanding your own personal needs and your own personal ability to tolerate certain drug therapies. We're going to spend a little time actually talking about how drugs are developed. And Brace and I don't want to overcomplicate this, so we want to make this as simple to understand as possible. The reality is that a new drug may take 7 to 12 years from the point at which the actual molecule is discovered to actually being available to patients like yourselves in the pharmacy. The current estimate is for most medications that it might take about $1 billion to actually create and bring a new drug to market. This cost has been going up just absolutely incrementally every single year, not only because of the difficulties in applying some of the new techniques, biotechnology. There were references to monoclonal antibodies. Dr. Pinter-Brown talked about that this morning. These are biotechnology-derived products which take a great deal of science, a great deal of understanding of your human genome. A lot of the frontiers here are designed rather than in the early 1900s when drugs were simply tried. We think it might do this, or I saw it do this in a dog, or I saw that it does that, and then they were tried with patients. We've tried very hard as an industry to try to improve the possibilities and the results. So we now use something that is called rational drug design. So really trying to understand the disease and how the disease actually might affect you at the level of your DNA, and then actually design something to block or augment that, which is called targeted therapy now. So we have the research that's ongoing now is just a lot more sophisticated, and it's really about finding out what's causing diseases and then designing something to fix it. It might be interesting to you to know that until 1963, and there are a couple people in here who were around in 1963, but until 1963, when the Kefauver Acts were actually enacted by Congress, drugs only had to be shown that they were safe. They did not actually have to be shown as being effective. So it's unbelievable to believe that literally until about 50 years ago, many drugs that were available, nobody actually even knew whether they worked or not. They only knew that they didn't hurt people, if you will. So we've come a long way from that now. This is just one estimate done. This has happened to be some data from a drug that was developed by Hoffmann-La Roche, a Swiss manufacturer, and that's why this is in Swiss francs. But it was about 1 billion Swiss francs. Over 7 million hours of work went into developing this drug. They did over 6,500 experiments, which means some of these were large-scale clinical trials with thousands of patients in them. There were over 423 dedicated researchers that many of them spent the bulk of 10 or more years working on one drug to just produce that one drug. So to give you an idea of the massive effort that it takes to get something that actually is specifically valuable to whether it's a heart medication, a brain medication. As you know, there's a great deal of research going on in the field of Alzheimer's now. And just to get something there that can actually be available so that doctors can prescribe it is a pretty gargantuan effort.
One comment I might make.
Sure.
If that drug wasn't approved, and many are not, that formula still holds true. So.
Right. Exactly. Please.
With the Ebola vaccine that's been so successful, it was only in the experimental stages, if I'm correct.
Right.
So now what happens? Since it's been effective, is it out of the experimental and
So
using tobacco? It's another
Right.
use for tobacco. Do you know the tobacco was sort of banned, and now
Right.
it has a regeneration.
Well, it's Barbara, it's amazing where certain drugs come from. There's no doubt about it. The plant-derived medications, like from tobacco, where they're actually using some of the bacteria that are involved in transmutating some of the disease. So with Ebola, it happens to be a small company based in San Diego, where I live, and the drug company is ZMAP. And what they've done is they've actually experimentally developed this product. It's not really a product, it's a process and an antibody. And so essentially the problem is they haven't what's called scaled up. They haven't even figured out how to make enough of it other than just on a little laboratory setting. So what happened was that, you know, this Ebola virus came to town, and they treated a couple, 3 patients, and then they ran out of drug. They didn't have enough. So there's a big rush now on the part of a number of major pharmaceutical companies to try and replicate some of the work they've done, as well as the ZMAP company is working on this. So there's this huge rush, but in point of fact, it was only because of the unusual circumstances around the Ebola virus, much like you might have heard about, there was a meningitis outbreak in Princeton, in which the students there were all vaccinated with an experimental vaccine that was only available in Europe. So in both of these cases, none of those agents or those drugs have actually been through the rigorous process of going through the FDA, and they will still need to do that. in order to actually be commercially available, okay? So,
Because they still don't know the after effects. And
No,
they could
no,
get
so-
Ebola, but it might be worse.
exactly. So there are aspects of what we call toxicology. So we don't know what's going to happen to patients who take this. We also don't know how long it actually is effective. Are you getting vaccinated once? And vaccines are a little bit different than other medications, in particular that you might be taking for cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. To the best of my knowledge, and I know, Marianne, you know, I'm not aware of a vaccine approach to CTCL at this time. Yeah. So, you know, there are a lot of aspects when you hear about, you know, oh, somebody got treated with this. It doesn't necessarily mean that that product is now going to be suddenly overnight available to the broad population. Okay? Yeah, sure. So this little graphic that was put together really kind of helps illustrate kind of the so-called snowball's chance that we're going to get something effective and safe to be used. So just to give you an idea, there's this is the timeline here, and I know it may be kind of fuzzy to see, but this is about 3 to 6 years from the pre-discovery side to basically before we actually go into human beings, okay? So there are a number of tests that have to be done prior to this time in order to make sure that the drug is at least ready to go into human beings. The period of time that goes into human clinical trials is about 6 to 7 years on average. Now, there will be some differences between drugs. You'll hear about drugs that will move through very quickly, and some just take a long, long time. I am aware of, was associated with the development of a product for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, and the scientist who actually discovered this treatment, it was oral gold, a heavy metal. Unfortunately, he worked on this for 17 years and passed away before the drug ever even made it to human clinical trials. He had devoted his entire life to it. So the point being here that if you look, you start with literally maybe 10,000 compounds that you're looking at to possibly treat this disease, and it gets winnowed down so that going into clinical trials, because it gets very expensive at this point to actually start testing the drugs, you will have tried to prioritize from about 10,000 compounds down to 5 that you think actually might make it. And so you go into, and many of you may be familiar with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 aspects of the clinical trials. But what you may not know is the number of volunteers that are needed to go into those clinical trials to make them statistically valuable, okay? So if any of you are horse racers, you know that understanding handicapping your bets here is really what's going on here. So we need enough patients to actually make a prediction that when this drug comes out onto the market, this is pretty much so how it's going to behave, okay? So you can see that in the phase 3 clinical trials where you're really trying to establish that it does what you think it's going to do and it works the way you propose it does, it may take somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 patients to actually study this. So if you're thinking about CTCL and there's only 30,000 patients in the United States, you're actually talking about having 1 out of every 10 patients who's diagnosed get into these clinical trials, and that makes life really challenging for drug developers. Timing-wise, once you've got that data and you go to the FDA, things have improved significantly at the FDA over the last decade, and the approval time is all pretty much so generally under 2 years, and sometimes can be as quick as 6 months. To give you an idea, the amount of data that has to be reviewed, even though we do it electronically, the amount of the volume of material that needs to be reviewed, if it was on paper, would typically, for most of these applications, it would fill 2 or 3 semi-vans. So it's really a lot of information to go through, and the regulators try to do that as quickly as they can. Now, it's not just your taxpayer dollars that are paying the FDA to do this. The actual drug companies have to pay fees to the FDA to get them to review these medications. So there are additional costs involved in actually getting through our own FDA. And then if you think about it, there are regulatory bodies in Europe, in Japan, Latin America. If the drug is going to be available worldwide, which is the intent of most companies, then you've got the same process largely that you're going through in a lot of these other countries.
And if I may make a quick comment, obviously this takes a lot of money, and the funding sources vary. Some drug companies are public, and other drug companies rely on investors, venture capital companies. And so not only are the drug companies focused on giving the FDA the data they need, they're also focused on making sure that the funders continue to be committed. And at any point in this process, if data doesn't look good, the funders can say, we're out. And then it's a mad scramble to try to find other funding sources. So drug companies, when they get closer and closer to approval, are really in a very tight spot. And it's all about how the data looks.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point. We wanted to talk a little bit about this kind of, I'll use a buzzword here, this ecosystem that revolves around you and the way in which you're getting treated. I'll talk about that in a second, but I wanted to speak to something that Brace brought up about the economics of this. So I told you, you can go and get a whole genome screen today, and there are kind of futurists who are looking at this in the not too distant future, that much the same way you might go in and get a urinalysis or essentially a blood panel drawn to understand what your cholesterol is, your hemoglobin, et cetera. There is a great deal of belief that eventually, in the not too distant future, you will also have an opportunity to get a whole genome screen as a routine test so that that's on board in your medical records. To give you an idea, just 5 years ago, a couple of the companies that are very invested in this area of genetic mapping, to get a whole genome screen was about $100,000 to get one of these done. Today, a desktop, it looks like the size of a printer, actually can do this analysis for about $1,000. And the intent is the rate at which this is advanced is literally by the end of this year, there is a belief that we can probably get this done for as little as $100 and be accurate about it. So if you can think about that kind of advance that's happening, the ability to diagnose and get more accurate about your specific disease is happening as we speak. And I think that those kinds of tools are really going to be valuable because they do the two most important things we all want, which is get us closer to a possible cure, and secondly, speed this up in a way that doesn't have you wasting time, precious living time, taking medications that might not be valuable for you, okay? So let me just go into this real quick here. Yes, sir? Illumina. It's a company called Illumina. Yeah, Illumina. Yes. I'm sure they'd love to make it readily available to a doctor nearby you. So, the company is one of the fastest growing firms in the United States in the diagnostic genomic space. And there are other companies that are engaged in this too. This is called next generation screening, okay?
And actually, Michael, I'll tell you that we interacted with a company called Secuencia, and they have a diagnostic that they're looking at as part of their portfolio, but specifically for cutaneous lymphoma. So they're working on a diagnostic panel for cutaneous lymphoma. So it's exciting. It's not necessarily here yet. They're working on it, the science, but it's good to know that there are companies interested in our specific disease. So as the science gets more available, hopefully we'll see more opportunities for us to be able to specifically to play in the diagnostic world.
And what your foundation is doing is really constantly scouring and looking for anything that's going to leverage an opportunity for our treatment. That's really what we're trying to do here. This This is all about advocating for you in an organized fashion, because I guarantee you that everybody in this room has tried to do their own research, tried to reach out and find who knows more about this. There's just, the reason this organization was founded was because two women, both named Judy, couldn't find any information. They were driven to, one for her husband and the other for herself, were driven to try and find a way of learning about this and then making that information available to others. And that's really what started this. It's very similar to many, many other patient foundations. You know, I talked earlier a little bit about orphan diseases. Well, there was a woman by the name of Abby Myers whose son was afflicted with a very serious unknown disease. She searched for months to try and find somebody who even knew anything about this disease, and she helped found an organization called called NORD, the Organization for Rare Disorders, National Organization for Rare Disorders. And that is a collection of all of these types of orphan diseases. We work closely with the Genetic Alliance and with the Coalition of Lymphomas to really try to just keep scouring the world, literally, for things that might be valuable for you folks. So I know you've heard it ad nauseum today, but I'll reference you back to the website or to the office. Feel free. We need your help. We need your help to bring that information forward to others, and we need your help to grow the awareness of this disease as well. So let me just, this is kind of, I'm going to just kind of wheel through this because it's not necessarily pertinent on a day-to-day basis, but I wanted you to be aware that there are a lot of people who are involved in trying to make sure that the right kinds of medications and the right kinds of therapies, because it's not always just drugs. As any of those of you who are undergoing light therapy or have been involved in other types of approaches to treating your disease, recognize that some of these are laboratory techniques, some of these are mechanical types of techniques, and some of these are just lifestyle modification techniques. We just talked a little bit about spending a little time in the sun. I mean, all of you here in Florida, if it's appropriate for your disease, I was reflecting with Jerry here that Benjamin Franklin used to take a stroll without anything on for 20 minutes every day in his private garden. If you don't have a private garden, I don't recommend it. But he took a stroll every day with nothing on and did that in the fresh air and the sun. Ironically, or as it turns out, a little bit of that UV light, not a sunburn, but a little bit of that UV light is not a bad thing for certain stages of this disease. So I encourage you to be healthy and be thinking about the way in which you're managing your disease is really a whole ecosystem of people. So behind the scenes, there's a drug company and a research company that's working on medications that hopefully will be of value in this treatment, this disease. They ultimately have to go to a drug distributor or a wholesaler to make these medications available to you. So some of you may have experienced when you've gone to a pharmacy, your medicine isn't there. It's only distributed through certain qualified distribution channels, certain pharmacies that can get it to you. Some medications are delivered directly to your home. They have certain special needs. They might need to be refrigerated. This is essentially called cold chain management. They want to be under a specific temperature and a specific way of being managed or handled. So you'll work with your physician and your nursing staff in your office to make sure that you understand how to receive those drugs. But those drugs all come through some sort of distributor or specialty pharmacy. I mentioned mail order. There may be drugs that you take on a chronic basis that are supportive care or related to your CTCL or enabling you to benefit from the CTCL treatment that you'll get on a monthly or a 90-day basis. Your pharmacist is a wonderful resource for you. If you have not done more than come in and signed for your medicine, take the time to talk to them a little bit about your disease and ask them how you can, if you're unclear about how you can get the most benefit from the medicine that you're being given, spend some time with them, because the pharmacists are very much so today, especially in certain chain pharmacies like CVS, are really, really focused on trying to make sure that you get the most value and the best clinical benefit out of what you're taking. And obviously, your doctor, most of us think of them at the center of this, but your doctor is obviously the key source for your treatment. You have nursing personnel like Marianne who are they've devoted their lives to this, and they understand, especially oncology nurses and nurses in the dermatology field, those who are treating CTCL have a deep understanding of what the other patients are going through, as well as an opportunity to try and make things good for you. If you have a social worker or somebody who is available to you to talk about some of the lifestyle management pieces of this, obviously this disease comes with a whole host of other secondary issues, if you will, related to itching, related to the shedding of skin, related to how much time you can spend in the sun, the kinds of activities that you are involved in. The reality is this disease not only affects you as a patient, but it clearly affects the people around you. So don't neglect the fact that those around you who care about you and are involved in life with you, or are married to you, or your partners, help them understand how you're going through this. And I think you'll feel a lot better about what it is that you're doing. And of course, we can't leave out the insurance company or the way in which these medications are being paid for. This entire ecosystem is something that becomes of interest and concern to every one of our patients. And so you need to have an advocate in this, and this is really what the Cutaneous Lymphoma Foundation is all about. Because we are spending a great deal of time, the board that's represented here today in this room, we're all volunteers. We're doing this because we believe in the need for care in this area. So we're not being compensated, if you will, for spending this time with you. But just speaking personally, this is a disease that caused me, even though commercially it was part of my job almost 20 years ago, it has now become a cause for me to really try to make a difference for people. And I will share with you candidly the event that changed my mind about this. This might be meaningful to some of you. So in the development of trying to understand the market and the disease, et cetera, many companies will do what are called focus groups, okay? And so we gather together patients to hear about their issues around treatment. And at a point when we had, the company I was working for at the time had already launched a new drug, we wanted to get some feedback from patients who were on the medication as to how it was working for them. And I happened to be in a focus group that was taking place in Kansas City. And around the table, I was behind the glass, and around the table were about 7 or 8 older patients who had been treated with the medication that we had launched about 6 months before, and we wanted to see if it had made any difference in their lives. Of this group, only one of them was a gentleman, an older gentleman. And he happened to proudly announce to the group, he said, so this medication has changed my life so much that I slept with my wife last night for the first time. And all of the other women at the table just kind of chortled, they thought, oh my gosh, he's being this plain. And he goes, no, it's not what you think. I mean, this disease has affected me so badly, with cracks and fissures and bleeding and loss of skin, that I haven't been able to sleep in the same bed with her. So last night, I got to sleep in bed with her and hold her. That was for me a really telling moment that said, I've got to do something more about this, because that meant a lot, that we were actually able to create something that would make a difference for patients. So that's where we're coming from as a foundation, just so you know. That's what it means, and I can tell in some of you, that's exactly what it means to you too. So just know we're in there. We're trying to do the best we can for you, okay?